Marcus had lived alone on the desert ranch for 3 years, ever since Sarah died. The wind spoke to him in her voice sometimes, carrying memories across the cracked earth like tumbleweeds. He was 42 but felt ancient, his hands weathered from work, his heart weathered from loss. The cattle grazed lazily in the distance while he sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of copper and blood. That was when he first saw her. She appeared as a shimmer at first, a heat mirage dancing on the horizon. But mirages don't walk toward you with deliberate steps. Marcus squinted, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle beside his chair. The figure grew larger as it approached, impossibly large. His breath caught in his chest. She had to be 20 feet tall, maybe more. Her dress was black and tattered, flowing around her like smoke. Her hair cascaded down her shoulders in dark waves, and even from this distance, he could see the sharp angles of her face, beautiful and terrible. Marcus stood slowly, his legs trembling. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, to shoot. But he did none of these things. There was something in the way she moved, a heaviness that wasn't just physical. She carried grief like a cloak. He recognized it because he wore the same one. When she reached the fence line, she stopped. Her eyes, dark as midnight, fixed on him. They were ancient eyes, eyes that had witnessed centuries of sorrow. "You're not afraid," she said. Her voice was deep and resonant, like thunder rolling across distant mountains. It wasn't a question. Marcus swallowed hard, his throat dry as the desert around them. He should be terrified. He should be running. But instead, he shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "I reckon I'm not." She tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "Why?" The question hung in the air between them. Marcus thought about Sarah, about the empty bed, about the way silence had become his only companion. "Because I've got nothing left to lose," he answered honestly. The giant woman stepped over the fence as easily as he might step over a crack in the sidewalk. Her shadow fell across him, cool and dark. Up close, he could see the details of her face more clearly. She was stunningly beautiful, but there was pain etched into every line, every curve. Her lips were full and sad. Her cheekbones sharp as knife blades. "I am Morgana," she said. "I've walked this earth for 500 years. I've seen empires rise and fall. I've loved and lost more times than you have heartbeats remaining." Marcus nodded slowly, unsure what to say to that. "Marcus," he offered. "I raise cattle. Lost my wife 3 years back. I'm nobody special." Morgana moved closer, circling him slowly. He felt like prey being assessed by a predator, but there was no malice in her gaze. Only curiosity. "You live here alone?" she asked. "I do," he confirmed. "Just me and the cattle and the wind." She stopped in front of him again, so close now that he had to crane his neck back to see her face. "I'm looking for something," she said softly. "Something I lost a very long time ago." Her eyes searched his, looking for something he didn't understand. "What did you lose?" Marcus asked. The giant widow's expression shifted, pain flickering across her features like lightning. "Hope," she whispered. "I lost hope." Marcus understood that. He'd lost it too, the day Sarah stopped breathing. The day the cancer finally won. He'd been surviving since then, not living. Just going through the motions, feeding cattle, fixing fences, watching sunsets alone. "That's a hard thing to lose," he said quietly. Morgana nodded, and for a moment, they simply stood there in the dying light, two souls united by the common language of loss. Morgana stayed. Marcus didn't invite her and didn't ask her to leave. She simply remained, setting up camp in the far field where an old barn stood abandoned. She was too large for any building on the property, so she made do with the open sky as her roof. Marcus watched her from a distance that first night, saw her curl up against the barn wall like a child seeking comfort from a parent. Despite her size, despite her power, she looked vulnerable. The next morning, he found her by the creek. She was kneeling in the shallow water, her massive hands cupped to catch the flowing stream. She drank deeply, then looked up to find him watching. "Do I frighten you now, in the daylight?" she asked. Marcus considered the question carefully. In the harsh morning sun, she was even more imposing. Her shadow stretched across the entire creek bed. But fear? No, that wasn't what he felt. "You make me curious," he admitted. She smiled, and it transformed her face completely. For a moment, the sorrow lifted, and he saw what she must have looked like centuries ago, before the weight of time bent her spine. They developed a strange routine over the following days. Marcus tended his cattle, and Morgana wandered the property. She moved with surprising grace for someone so large, careful not to disturb his fences or frighten his animals. In the evenings, they talked. She told him stories of ancient times, of kings and queens he'd only read about in school. She spoke of lost loves, of a husband who died in a war whose name had been forgotten by history. She'd been pregnant when he died, she revealed one night, her voice breaking. The baby hadn't survived the grief. Marcus shared his own story in return. He told her about Sarah, about their 15 years together. About the way she laughed at his terrible jokes. About the garden she'd kept, now overgrown with weeds. About the final 6 months, watching her fade away, feeling helpless. I couldn't save her, he said, staring at his hands. I'd have given anything, everything, but it wasn't enough. Morgana listened without judgment, without offering empty platitudes. She understood that some wounds don't heal. They just become part of who you are. A week passed, then 2. Marcus found himself looking forward to their evening conversations. Morgana's presence filled the emptiness that had consumed his home. She was intelligent and funny, surprisingly gentle despite her size. She helped him with the ranch work, able to move heavy equipment he'd struggled with for years. She fixed the roof of his house by simply reaching up and replacing the damaged tiles. They laughed together, and the sound felt foreign to Marcus, like a language he'd forgotten how to speak. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant oranges and purples, Morgana asked him to walk with her. They went to the highest hill on his property, where you could see for miles in every direction. She sat down, and he climbed up to sit on her knee, as had become their custom. From this height, he could see the world as she saw it. Small. Distant. Beautiful but fragile. Marcus, she said softly, I need to ask you something. He turned to look up at her face. There was nervousness there, an emotion he hadn't seen from her before. Ask away, he encouraged. She took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice trembled. Why do you look at me the way you do? He frowned, confused. What way? She gestured vaguely, her massive hand encompassing the space between them. Like I'm not a monster. Like I'm not something to be feared or studied or conquered. You look at me like I'm just a woman. Marcus considered this. He'd never thought about it consciously, but she was right. He didn't see her size anymore. He saw her. Because that's what you are, he said simply. A woman who's lived a long time and hurt a lot. Same as I'm just a man who's lived a short time and hurt plenty. Then she asked the question that would change everything between them. She shifted, and he slid down from her knee to stand on the ground. She leaned forward, her face coming close to his. Why are your eyes between my legs? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus felt his face flush. He hadn't realized he'd been looking there. But he had been, he realized. Not with lust, not exactly. With something deeper, something he couldn't name. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. The truth came out before he could stop it. Because I see your soul there, Marcus said, the words hanging in the desert air like a prayer. Morgana's eyes widened, and for a moment, she was absolutely still. He continued, the words flowing now like water breaking through a dam. Every culture, every person, they've got their own idea about where the soul lives. Some say the heart. Some say the eyes. But I think it's different for everyone. And yours, Morgana, your soul lives in your vulnerability, in the places you think you have to hide. She straightened up, and he saw tears forming in those ancient eyes. How could you possibly know that? She whispered. Marcus smiled sadly. Because mine's in the same place. Sarah used to tell me I kept my heart locked up somewhere nobody could reach it. She was wrong. It wasn't locked up. It was just scared. And I see that same fear in you. He gestured to her massive form. You hide behind your size. You make people afraid so they'll stay away. But I'm not staying away, Morgana. I see you. The giant widow lowered herself to the ground, lying on her side so they could be closer to eye level. Her tears fell like rain, darkening the dusty earth. I've been alone for so long, she said, her voice breaking. After my husband died, after I lost my child, I grew. The grief made me bigger. It literally expanded me. The more I hurt, the larger I became, until I couldn't fit in the world anymore. I couldn't hold a friend's hand. I couldn't embrace someone I cared about. I became too big for human connection. Marcus sat down in front of her face, close enough to see his reflection in her tear-filled eyes. But you're here now, he pointed out gently. You could have kept walking. You could have stayed alone on your wandering. But you stopped here. Why? Morgana closed her eyes, more tears escaping. Because I saw you on that porch, she admitted. And you looked exactly how I felt. Small and alone in a vast, empty world. I thought maybe, just maybe, someone who understood loneliness the way you clearly did might not run from me. They talked through the night, words flowing between them like a river finding its course. Marcus told her things he'd never told anyone. About the guilt he felt, wondering if he'd missed signs of Sarah's illness earlier. About the anger he'd harbored toward God, toward fate, toward the universe itself. About the numbness that had settled over him like frost, making every day feel like walking through fog. Morgana listened to all of it, her eyes never leaving his face, her attention complete and total. In turn, she shared her deepest shames. She'd been married 4 times over 5 centuries, she revealed. Each man had eventually feared her, or tried to control her, or sought to profit from her uniqueness. She'd outlived them all, and each death had made her grow larger, as if her body was trying to contain grief that couldn't be measured. I'm tired, she confessed as dawn approached. I'm so tired of being this thing that doesn't fit anywhere. Of being too much for the world to hold. You fit here, Marcus said firmly. On this ranch, in this space, you fit just fine. She smiled through her tears. For how long, Marcus? You're mortal. In 50 years, maybe less, you'll be gone. And I'll grow even larger from losing you. I'll become even more of a monster. He stood up, walked closer, and placed his hand against her cheek. His palm covered only a fraction of her face, but she leaned into the touch like a cat seeking affection. Then we have 50 years, he said. Maybe less. Maybe more. Who knows? But right now, in this moment, we have each other. Isn't that enough? Morgana reached out with one massive finger and gently touched his chest, right over his heart. The gesture was tender, intimate. I don't know how to be small again, she whispered. I don't know if I can fit into your life. Marcus covered her finger with both his hands. I'm not asking you to be small. I'm asking you to be exactly who you are. And I'll be exactly who I am. And we'll figure out how to make it work, day by day. She studied him for a long moment, searching his face for doubt, for fear, for the inevitable rejection she'd learned to expect. But she found none of those things. What she found in Marcus's eyes was acceptance. Understanding. And something else, something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Hope. That fragile, dangerous thing she thought she'd lost forever. I want to try, she said finally. I want to believe this is possible. Marcus grinned, and it was the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Then let's try, he said simply. As the sun rose over the desert, painting everything in gold, they made a silent pact. 2 broken souls, different in size but identical in pain, choosing to heal together. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Marcus had experienced. He and Morgana worked together to create a life that accommodated both their needs. She helped him expand his property, using her strength to build new structures. They constructed a massive shelter for her, part barn, part home, with walls that could withstand the desert winds. Marcus spent his evenings there, sitting on platforms they'd built so he could be closer to her eye level. They'd talk for hours, about everything and nothing. The townspeople eventually noticed. Marcus had to make a supply run to the nearest settlement, about 40 miles away. When he returned, he found Morgana pacing anxiously. They'll come, she said, her voice tight with worry. They'll see me and they'll come with guns or cameras or scientists. They always do. Marcus set down his supplies and looked up at her. Let them come, he said calmly. This is my land. You're here because I want you here. Anyone who has a problem with that can discuss it with me. 3 days later, a truck did arrive. The sheriff, a man named Tom who Marcus had known for years, drove up with 2 deputies. Marcus met them at the gate, his rifle slung casually over his shoulder. Tom stepped out, his eyes scanning the horizon until they landed on Morgana, who stood by the barn. Even from a distance, her size was shocking. Marcus, Tom said carefully, we've been hearing some wild stories. Thought we should check in. Marcus nodded. She's a guest on my property, Tom. Not causing any trouble. Not breaking any laws. Tom chewed his lip, clearly uncomfortable. Marcus, she's 20 feet tall. People are scared. They want to know what she is, where she came from. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. She's a woman who's had a hard life. That's all anyone needs to know. And if people are scared, they can stay off my land. The sheriff exchanged glances with his deputies. Federal government might want to get involved, he warned. People like her, they don't just exist without questions. Marcus took a step forward. She's not a specimen to be studied. She's a person. And she's staying. The standoff lasted another few minutes before Tom sighed and got back in his truck. I'll try to keep them away, he said. But Marcus, this isn't going to stay quiet. As the sheriff drove away, Morgana approached. You shouldn't have done that, she said softly. You'll lose friends. You'll become an outcast. Marcus turned to her with a slight smile. I was already an outcast. And as for friends, anyone who can't accept you isn't someone I need in my life. She looked at him with such overwhelming emotion that he felt his own eyes sting. They were right to worry about visitors. Over the next month, reporters came. Paranormal investigators. Government officials with clipboards and stern expressions. Marcus turned them all away. He installed cameras and warning signs. He made it clear that anyone who set foot on his property without permission would face legal consequences. Morgana watched all of this from a distance, amazed. No one had ever defended her before. No one had ever chosen her over the easier path. One night, after an particularly exhausting day of turning away curious onlookers, Marcus climbed up to their usual talking spot. Morgana was quiet, staring out at the stars. You could make a fortune, she said suddenly. If you let them study me, interview me, document me. You'd never have to worry about money again. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Is that what you want? He asked. She turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. No, she said firmly. But I don't want to be a burden either. I don't want you to suffer because of me. He moved closer, placing his hand on her arm. The gesture was becoming natural between them, this constant need for physical contact. You're not a burden, he said. You're the first thing that's made me feel alive in 3 years. The first reason I've had to wake up in the morning beyond just feeding cattle and waiting to die. His honesty was raw, unfiltered. I need you to understand something, Morgana. You saved my life by coming here. Before you, I was just existing. Now I'm living again. Her eyes glistened with tears. I feel the same way, she whispered. For 500 years, I've been walking. Just walking, with no destination, no purpose. But here, with you, I feel like I've finally found a place to rest. They sat in silence for a while, comfortable with each other in a way that felt both new and ancient. Marcus, she said eventually, I'm falling in love with you. The words were simple, direct, terrifying. He felt his heart hammer in his chest. I know, he said quietly. I'm falling in love with you too. They both knew how impossible it was. The logistics alone were overwhelming. But love, true love, doesn't care about logistics. It doesn't care about size or mortality or what the rest of the world thinks. It simply exists, demanding to be acknowledged. What do we do about it? Morgana asked, vulnerability clear in every syllable. Marcus smiled up at her. We love each other, he said simply. We figure out the rest as we go. They learned each other in the months that followed. Marcus discovered that Morgana loved music, particularly old folk songs that reminded her of her youth. He bought a guitar and taught himself to play, sitting on her palm while she lifted him close to her ear so she could hear better. She would cry sometimes, tears of joy at the simple pleasure of hearing music played just for her. He learned that she was brilliant at mathematics, having had centuries to study. She would solve complex problems in her head that would take him hours with pencil and paper. Morgana learned that Marcus had a wicked sense of humor hidden beneath his quiet exterior. He would make her laugh until her whole body shook, the sound of it echoing across the desert like thunder. She discovered he loved to read and had a collection of books he'd been accumulating for years. She would read them too, her massive hands carefully turning pages made for much smaller fingers. They would discuss the stories for hours, debating characters and themes like scholars. Their physical relationship developed slowly, carefully. They found ways to be intimate that worked for their unique situation. Marcus would fall asleep against her chest, listening to the deep, slow rhythm of her heartbeat. She would curl around him protectively, her massive hand resting gently over him like a blanket. They learned each other's bodies in ways that had nothing to do with sex and everything to do with trust. She would let him climb into her palm, trusting him not to fear the height. He would let her touch his face with fingers that could easily crush him, trusting her control. One evening, 6 months after she'd first appeared on his horizon, Marcus had an idea. He spent days preparing, not telling her what he was planning. When everything was ready, he led her to the highest point on his property. He'd set up lights, strung from poles he'd erected specifically for this purpose. He'd brought blankets and food and wine. What is all this? She asked, amazed. A date, he said simply. A proper date. I realized we've never had one. They spent the evening like any couple might, talking and laughing and sharing food. He'd brought enough for a feast, and she ate delicately, mindful of the preparations he'd made. As the night grew deeper, Marcus stood and extended his hand. "Dance with me," he said. She laughed, the sound full of disbelief. "How?" He grinned. "Put your finger down. I'll dance with your finger." She did as he asked, and he held her fingertip like he might hold a partner's hand. They moved together, swaying to music only they could hear, and it was perfect. It was absurd and perfect and exactly what they both needed. "Marry me," Marcus said suddenly, the words escaping before he could think them through. Morgana froze, her eyes wide. "What?" He looked up at her, his heart racing but his voice steady. "Marry me. I know it's crazy. I know we can't have a normal wedding or a normal life. But I don't want normal. I want you. I want this. I want to spend whatever time I have left making you happy." She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "Marcus, you'll age. You'll die. And I'll go on." "I know," he said gently. "But isn't 50 years of happiness worth the pain at the end? Isn't love worth the grief that comes with it?" She thought about her husband, dead 500 years. About the pain of losing him. About the baby she'd carried and lost. About all the years of loneliness that followed. And she thought about these past 6 months, the happiest she'd been in centuries. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, it's worth it. Yes, I'll marry you." They spent the rest of the night talking about the future, about the life they would build together. They married a month later in a ceremony attended by no one but themselves. Marcus spoke vows he'd written himself, his voice carrying across the empty desert. Morgana spoke hers in return, words that had been forming in her heart since the day they met. They had no rings that would fit both of them, so instead, Marcus tied a piece of rope around her finger and she tied a matching piece around his. They sealed their vows not with a kiss, but with her gently touching her lips to his entire body, and him kissing her fingertip in return. The years that followed were not easy. There were challenges, questions from authorities, struggles with the simple logistics of their life together. But there was also joy. Deep, profound joy. They built a life that worked for them, ignoring what the world thought they should be. Morgana never shrank, but Marcus never asked her to. He loved her exactly as she was. And she loved him the same way. They were proof that love isn't about fitting together perfectly. It's about choosing to fit together, whatever that looks like. 20 years later, Marcus sat on Morgana's palm, his hair now gray, his body weakening with age. She looked exactly the same as the day they met, unchanged by time. "I'm not afraid," he told her, knowing his days were numbered. She held him close to her chest, letting him hear her heart. "I am," she admitted. "I'm terrified." He smiled, touching her skin gently. "Don't be. You gave me the best years of my life. You made me feel alive again. And when I'm gone, you keep living. You keep finding reasons to wake up. Promise me." She promised, though it broke her heart. When Marcus died, peacefully in his sleep, cradled in her hand, Morgana did grow. But not as much as before. The grief was there, sharp and terrible, but so was gratitude. So were memories of laughter and love and ridiculous dancing. She buried him on the ranch he'd loved, under the sky they'd watched together. And she stayed there, tending the land, living the life they'd built. Because he'd asked her to keep living, and she would honor that request. She would carry his love with her, proof that even the most impossible connections can heal the deepest wounds. Her soul, visible in her vulnerability, had finally found peace. And his soul, which he'd thought buried with Sarah, had found its way home at last.